Bear with me one moment.
Okay.
All right, we are live, it says on the screen. So, Mr. Chairman, Josue, it's up to you.
Okay, I'll call to order the meeting of the Governance Committee on Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. And I'll take roll call. Sylvia,
Present.
Martha,
Present.
Tatiana,
Here.
and Josue is here. All right, everyone's here, I think, right? Are we missing it? Is this the whole committee? I think this is the whole committee. Yeah, great. All right, well, we'll move on to the agenda. Who wants to make that motion?
I would like to make the motion to, no, what is it?
To approve the agenda.
To approve the agenda, sorry.
I second it.
Right, motion by Martha and a second by Sylvia to approve the agenda of the Waukegan Public Library Governance Committee on Wednesday, March 3rd. Sylvia?
Yes. Yes.
Tatiana, you're muted.
Yes.
Martha
Yes.
and myself, yes. All right, so the first item is new business review of review use of the library policy. John, do you want to give a presentation about this?
Absolutely. So when picking a discussion topic, I know we have in the past we've got a lot of different policies and a lot of different things we can do. I want to point out that we need to start with our plan of attack. And this is one thing that we've discussed, Sylvia and I and other board members and I in our individual conversations, is we need to make the library less of a place that's punitive and more of a place that's mediative to make it a more welcoming library for our community. And so currently this policy was passed in 2017 and basically says the board will maintain a climate conducive to the library. It mentions the guidelines governing the use of the library. And so it basically has to do with disruption, and staff may deem to notify the police if necessary, and that's built into our rules, so to speak. So if I may jump over to the guidelines themselves, if I could make it a little smaller, can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
If I can point out that all locations are free and open to all, that's a great statement to make. The problem I have with this, policy, which was approved by the Board of Trustees, but yet is not a policy, is that our list of things that we're expecting our patrons to do is short, and we're asking our patrons not to do things is exhaustingly long. And I get that we need to, maintain decorum and that we need to have a standard of or expectation of how people behave in the library. I would like to focus first on this policy that basically, again, the use of the library policy, which references the guidelines governing the use of the library to be more inclusive and less punitive. So we're basically, per the use of the library, we give anywhere between no less than 30 days and more than a year to be determined by the executive director. And of course, depending on the severity of the offense. I would like to rewrite this policy with a hope that we mediate with our patrons and with our public when there's a problem. So we don't just immediately kick people out of the building. And that's part of the staff's understanding as well, is that when people misbehave, we can kick them out and never see them again. And even with asking people to leave, which is supposed to be documented, no more than 1 year, even with the gentleman who threw a table through our window, he's allowed back in the library per this policy. And I'm not trying to say that people can't ever come back. I want to try and make it so that it's more of a process that allows them to come back the right way, so we don't have the continued behavior. Because when we've kicked people out of the building before, there was a gentleman who had been kicked out essentially what he understood for life. And that was for about a decade ago. He was drinking in the library, as an example. And he thought he could never come back. And he reached out and said, I was kicked out of the library a long time ago. He wasn't on any of our lists. He had never come back because of the way that situation transpired. So we need to, as an organization, work on rewriting this policy to be more inclusive. And again, we're not here to be the dictators or the ones who say what's acceptable and not acceptable so that we can keep people from using our services, but our services need to be written such that allows people to use the library more. And we work with our patrons to try and get them back in, not try and keep them out. So that is my brief explanation. Of course, this isn't meant for any action for this meeting or for the board meeting coming up, but if we're talking about policies and low-hanging fruit, I think this is certainly one we could focus on as a group and present to the board next month for modification.
Could you
John,
move
may I
that up?
ask? Go ahead.
Could you just move that letter up a little bit so we can see the bottom of the nots, do not, cannot do?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, there.
There you go. Okay.
John, may I ask what happens now? So say there is a patron that is aggressive or drinking in the library, how is that handled right now?
Currently, our policy states that adults who exhibit behavior were suspended from the library, who refuse to comply. Sorry, I jumped ahead. The adults who refuse to comply will be asked to display identification, which I take some exception to in terms of making people identify themselves, and asked to leave the library premises immediately for the balance of the day. For those who fail to do so, we call the police rather than mediating. And again, for people of color especially, calling the police has a tendency to be a death sentence. So I want to avoid any policy that says we're going to call the police. Now, I want to procedurally be able to call the police if we need to, but I don't want to make our staff reference a policy that states that we're going to call the police. Again, incidents of noncompliance after verbal requests will be reported in writing to the executive director. And that's where we would write an incident report that details the situation where was law enforcement involved, et cetera. And then we mediate each situation based on the circumstances. Usually it's just for the day and people come back. But things are different now than they ever have been. People are really on edge with the way the pandemic has caused our society to kind of turn inward a lot more. So I think currently we ask them to leave for the day. And then one of the internal pieces that we have currently is that we've basically turned it to a graduated system. So for the day, if it happens again with the same patron, and of course, because of documentation, we would know that, then it would be a week, a month, and then up to a year if it continues. And those are some of the examples. Internally, we handled them that way.
So if I was a patron and I was drinking in the library and staff saw, I would be given the opportunity to stop drinking and stay in the library, or would I be immediately asked to leave the premises?
They are asked to desist from such activity immediately. As far as drinking, again, that's where it really it's not clear. We ask the patrons not engage in illegal illicit activity. What is the one that says drink alcohol? I mean, basically, we're asking people not to do these things.
Drink from an uncovered container. Or
But
eat
if
food.
I am complying, then there's no issue. I'm not asked to leave, correct? If I got my container and I threw it in the trash and I complied, I would not be asked to leave. Or is it to the discretion of whatever employee?
It's usually at the discretion of the employees handling the situation. And again, we're working with the staff to be empowering our staff to be able to confront patrons in a pro-social way. Currently, it's a lot of deference to the safety team and saying these people are over here doing this thing and we need to get them out. And
John, well, yeah, in that situation, I would think there would have to be discretion because, I mean, if they're intoxicated, you don't really want people like that around, right?
right.
But if they're not intoxicated and they were just drinking once and they stopped, then I would assume that's okay.
Right. And we are also an organization that has drinking on premises. When we did the Ray Bradbury sculpture unveiling, there was wine and champagne. So we don't want to set double standards. But certainly, I mean, we don't want somebody sipping on a beverage that they're not supposed to have in a public building. I don't know what open container laws really state in Illinois, or if that's a violation of the law. Douglas, that would be a question for you. If somebody's drinking in, certainly in the library building, we would want to make sure that's handled.
Can you go here and show people? Because there seems to be two different things on there. Remember when you had it up, the other part regarding the policy? Okay, so when you read this, okay, first of all, it says any visitor, but then it says staff may notify the police if it deemed necessary. But then it goes, will be asked to display identification and to leave the library premises immediately. So first, in the second paragraph, it says we notify them. And in the second one, it says leave for the balance of the day. I would propose that there would be a person that would, like, in other words, so that way not every person has the option of, so here it says just staff may notify the police, but it doesn't say a protocol. In other words, let's say that you spot someone else, then who am I supposed to tell? Am I supposed to tell the executive director or whoever is supervisor on staff for that day, and they're ones to make the decision regarding removing the person or calling the police? Because here it leaves it kind of open. In other words, there has to be, I think there needs to be more like a chain of command of exactly, if a person does this, then they report this to such and such a person, and that person is the one to make the decision regarding removing them or calling the police. And then it doesn't say who's going to remove them. So it should be, and to leave the library premises. So it should say the security guard on staff will be responsible for removing the adult from the premises immediately for the balance of the day. And if they fail to do so, if they fail to cooperate with the security personnel, then the police will be notified by the security. Because right there, you just say staff may notify. So let's say that I think he should go, then I can call the police, and then we're going to be like, well, why did you call the police? You know what I mean?
I do somewhat, if I respectfully may. There is a difference between policy and procedure, and the way that we handle things internally. Again, they shouldn't all be written out in the policy. The policy is basically saying any visitor disrupting the use of the library guidelines that we read will be asked to cease and desist from such activity immediately. And if they don't, or if telling them to do so, like they're waving a gun around, for example, we don't have to tell them to desist. We can call police immediately. But what we're currently doing is staff is looking at this policy saying, well, policy says we can't do this, or policy says we can. And we need to, again, the focus on procedure internal is separate from the policy. And again, if they refuse to comply, they'll be asked to display identification and leave immediately for the balance of the day. So if they refuse to, as to Tatiana's question, if they are drinking on the library property, if they refuse to comply, then we take it to escalate it to a separate step. For those who fail to do so, police will be notified. I mean, that's pretty much a guarantee by our policy.
It seems like that line could escalate extremely quickly.
It does.
So if the second you are asking somebody for their ID, it seems like the next step is going to be the police.
And yes, that's part of the problem with this, the whole leaning on a policy as the rules. Again, the rules state and then the procedure follows. So Douglas, you had a question.
Yeah, the thing that I'm hearing, both from the trustees so far, but also from John, that sort of concerns me about this is I'm not actually hearing that the policy itself needs modification. What I'm hearing is that there needs to be better training, better, internal procedure, and better guidance and leadership within the organization to try to ensure that things aren't getting escalated beyond what they need to be. When you've got a serious incident, you want to have the ability and the staff to feel like they can absolutely pick up the phone and call the police if somebody's walking in with a gun. You want to be able to address situations like somebody who's a drunk dude wandering around. I understand why you want to have teeth in this policy, and I think that it's important that you have those teeth in this policy. What I think that I'm hearing that is that staff's overreacting, and to me that doesn't sound like a policy change that's necessary as much as we need to better train the staff to understand what the policy is saying. Because the way that I read this, and again, there's probably tweaks that we can come up with. We could certainly wordsmith something, but this is progressive. You ask the person to stop doing it. They decide not to do it. We say, hey, can you identify who you are for us? Because we want to, understand whether this is something that you've done 25 times before. or is this, your first violation? Maybe now it's serious enough. You've done this 6 other times. We want to, tell you, we need you to leave today. And at that point, we'll file a report with the executive director. The executive director then can decide whether or not it's appropriate to impose a suspension of some period of time. I'm reading this very progressively, and I think that that's how it's intended to be read. But what I'm hearing John say and what I'm hearing Martha sort of echo is, it sounds like we're bouncing right to stop what you're doing, identify yourself, and we're throwing you out all in one breath. And that's not what this says. So I don't know if it's necessary to modify the policy, but I do think that training is a necessary component.
I think so. It's what it is. Let's say that it's a patron and he exposes himself or goes down to the children's department, exposes himself to some kids, okay, or exposes himself to an employee. Then I don't think that there should be writing. I think it should be, you know what, you're out. This is it. Goodbye. So maybe to put it on different levels based on what it is, because there's certain things that are more serious than others, that I think we need to take that into consideration too.
I think that would be more something that falls into John in terms of protocol as opposed to policy. So yes, there's severity in people's actions. My goal in this and what I already see it doing is that it makes our patrons feel safe. So rather than looking to rewrite policy to not offend people that might be violating policy, I would prefer to tighten up where we can tighten it up and maybe word things a little bit differently in that section of what you can do as opposed to what you can't do. But I'm hesitant to cater to people who might be offended when they're not complying with good behavior, good practice.
Well,
And I
and
think
part of the reason too that we're looking at the procedure, as Douglas said, in the way we conduct the business, like Tatiana said, it's definitely a progressive thing, and it does put a lot of responsibility on my shoulders or our shoulders to decide, yes, this person exposed themselves to a child, they need to go, and we call law enforcement immediately because that's breaking the law. That is, again, violation of so many things. I think what I'm trying to point out is that, oh, go ahead.
What is I guess from this list, what is the most common that happens?
I would say by and large, and this is the reason I brought this to you, it's people making too much noise. And we are not a shushing library. I get it that we expect people to kind of maintain a decorum, but let me also point out that decorum has a tendency to be culturally specific, and different cultures conduct themselves differently. And if we're going to apply this broad brushstroke of how we treat all people, it's not taking into consideration that everybody's brought up in a different way, and we're expecting them to adhere to white Anglo-Saxon Protestant beliefs by coming in the library, or some kind of ethic or moral that they don't ascribe to at home. At the same time, we need people to be safe, as Tatiana said, and make sure that our list is longer up here at the top, not at the bottom. We ask that people ask us for help, and we're headed in the right direction. Then it goes south with, of course, we're not asking people to engage in illicit or illegal activity, but people are so literal on our staff that they're looking at this and saying, you violated, you're harassing other library users because your music's too loud. And we're making judgment calls based on what this says. Well, you're drinking from an uncovered container and you're doing it every day, so I'm going to ask you to leave forever.
Okay, can I make a comment because it personally affected me? So I have my little kids in the children's department, and some people were playing some very loud music that was explicit, loudly, explicitly in its lyrics. And I had my little children there. I don't feel like that was an appropriate situation, so I did complain. Now, there's a difference between people playing music loudly and playing offensive music. I hear what you're saying, and I think we can definitely make modifications on this. And I like that there's areas in the library where people can be louder or talk and hang out and listen to their music and do things. And I also like that there could be sections in the library that are quiet, so I'm not disrupted when I'm trying to work. So again, I think it has to do with how things are structured as opposed to policy itself. But I realize that's putting a lot on the shoulders of the staff.
What if we were to do, we will participate, we will speak in a quiet tone. We will turn our cell phones off or, you know what I mean, whatever. We will not, you know what I mean, we will, you know what I mean, do it that way. But there's a problem here. Just leave children who need assistance supervision unattended. You would have to have someone at the door really watching to make sure that the kids aren't just dropped off and coming in by themselves. That's a really hard one to enforce because a lot of kids do get dropped off.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely things on this list I think that we can tighten up, and I think that we can list some of this in more of the please do just by tweaking the phrasing of it. That's
Right.
doable to me, but I am not on board with trying to appease people that would be doing some of these things on here. I think there's a fine line here.
I think there's also different groups of people we're talking about, because if it's adults, obviously the treatment of adults is different than kids who, I mean, kids are going to play their music loud and break the rule once and then probably do it again. You know, it's just like, how do you deal with a kid and, you know, who's at the library and probably what if they don't have anywhere to go after school versus an adult? So
I think it could be handled similarly to school. You know, not that we want to take on being a school, but if we're going to be a building that doesn't expect children to be accompanied by an adult, then we also have to take on some of the responsibilities that the school districts do in terms of follow through and how to manage that. So you're right. I don't want to see children getting thrown out of the library, especially kids that have no place else to go. But we should not be afraid of enforcing, saying you can't play that music loud here. I expect you to speak politely. There's no reason to be rude. So,
And I agree with you wholeheartedly, because what we're currently doing is saying you're breaking the rules, you got to go, or we're giving them a warning. And I've told you already, you need to leave. And what it is it's impacting people of color more predominantly than it is people who are Caucasian. It is certainly leaving a lot to what would we view as objectionable. It may be something that's different to me, but I got people coming up to me saying, this guy, he's always looking at inappropriate stuff. And I said, where's the documentation? Nobody has written incident report 1 or even an email saying this person is doing this thing all the time. So people are making judgment calls, and it definitely leaves an awful lot up to speculation of what is disruptive or unsafe behavior. I mean, for you and me, it may be one thing, but for them, the patrons who come in our building, it may be something completely different. And part of the culture might be loud talking or playing music loud. We just need to try and mediate and work with the patrons rather than disciplining the patrons. We jump straight to discipline as an organization, and not just our library, but all libraries have a tendency to say, you broke the rules, you got to get out. And we need to Tatiana's point, counsel people through what it means to behave the appropriate way in the library.
And again, not that
I have a couple.
really jump in, and I'm sorry, Sylvia, I'll
Go ahead.
head up if you want, but you know, I do want us to be a little bit careful, you know, in modifying some of this, both for the reasons that I sort of said before, but also, you know, we do have to think about, you know, our own liability in all of these things. You know, we don't want to eliminate rules that, you know, would expose us or, you know, have impacts, you know, and I'm looking at things like the objectionable and illegal material, you know, on the computers. Like, I don't know that we necessarily want to create a defined list of here are the websites you can't visit. You know, we certainly, I'm sure, have some sort of filters or blockers to try to address some of that, I'm hoping.
I don't think
we
so.
don't.
Maybe that's something that
We are a
should do.
filterless library.
You know, do you want to have, I guess, a solid list of what those things are? Or do you want to have some discretion in it so that you can do things like staff training and say, you know, this might be something that's not comfortable to you as a, you know, white staffer, but, you know, think about this from the perspective of somebody of a different socioeconomic background. You know, and again, like, how strict do you want to have rules where they have to fit in the box? And if they don't fit in the box, then we have no enforcement mechanism in place, you know, versus, having sort of nebulous rules that allow a little bit more discretion and a little bit more leeway on the part of the library to step in when it's appropriate.
So I have just a couple questions. First of all, John, when we first started looking at this policy, you said something about asking for their identification. Could you clarify that for me?
Per the policy, anybody who's disruptive, if they refuse to comply with a verbal to stop whatever activity it is that they're doing, then they're asked to display identification and to leave the library premises immediately when they refuse to comply. Adults, not kids, but adults. And again, that leaves a lot to be speculated upon.
Can you expound on that some? I'm trying to decide, what your thought
Well,
process is.
I think, again, we're asking them to display identification so we can get their name and we can make sure that we know the next time, John Doe comes in, that John Doe was in last week and did the same thing. But the piece that's not happening is that it's not being documented that we spoke with John, because nobody's taken ID. A lot of time patrons will refuse to give us identification because of their personal beliefs.
And so they'll walk out and they've caused a disruption and they'll
And then
come
we're-
back
yes.
because we don't know who they are.
Right. And we're hanging pictures on the wall, like, keep an eye out for this patron. He was rude to me, or she was rude to me. And we're getting into it's a slippery slope. But
So
we definitely need to make sure that we have an enforceable rule. I agree with everything that's been said. We can't just go willy-nilly and let people, this is not the Wild West. We do need consequences for behaviors and actions. But what we don't need to do is pinpoint specific people or people who are not like us when we do address these behaviors and activities.
So I think when we rewrote this policy, there was something that dealt with staff safety. They didn't feel like they were safe and they didn't feel like they were being supported. So do you know anything about that? Or have you heard anything, with this policy?
With regard to the
specifically?
policy, not to my knowledge. I know that when we had the table thrower, people were upset because they felt the library couldn't keep them safe. There is a certain degree of risk involved in our jobs in working with the public. There's just working with the public. But as far as the policy being written to keep people safe, I think that comes more toward training and the procedure of what we do in case. We installed panic buttons at our customer service and reference desks because of the incident with the table thrower. And that's a step we can take internally to make sure that they have a quick and easy way to call 911 without arousing suspicion. Because we don't want to get to the point where we see somebody walk in the door and we call the cops on them. That's certainly not where we want to be as a library. We want to be welcoming and inviting, not exclusionary.
Has the staff been discouraged from calling the police if they feel unsafe?
Not at all.
Okay.
They've been encouraged to do so. And actually, we're trying to work with our staff to empower them to be able to go in teams of 2 or whatever the best, but we can't, again, react. We need to respond and in
Correct,
kind.
I agree. Douglas, what recommendations can you make here in terms of, it's a 2-part question. Do you find it beneficial to reword things in a more positive way, or do you think it has no bearing? That's my first question. And I guess secondly, do you think we should have more vague wording in some areas and then leave it up to our executive director to come up with protocol and procedure based on that?
You're asking really good questions. And I think that to some extent, when it comes to things like having rules, you want them to be a little bit more explicit, right? You want there to be clear things that are okay and not okay. And I know that I used the example of the internet usage as one where it's going to be a little bit more nebulous, but I'm not really sure that there's a good way to make things like that really strictly, delineated. You could certainly, I think, tighten that up even some, though, say things like obscene, pornographic, kind of material, and try to find some of those words that have been clearly defined legally that give you some guidance on the kind of material you're trying to avoid. When it comes to positive words, negative, we ask people to do this versus we ask them not to do this. I don't know that that really matters from where I'm going to sit. Because ultimately at the end of the day, I just need it to be a clear enough rule that we can defend ourselves if somebody comes back and sues us. You know, one of the things that I know that libraries don't like to look at much is that, you know, we still are public bodies, right? So we still are governmental units. We still have to, you know, be careful not to impinge too much on people's civil liberties, you know, without drawing some of those types of lawsuits. So I do want to make sure that whatever we write is something that's clear and enforceable. You know, and then going along with that, that brings us to, I think, the first part of your question, which was, you know, sort of garnered towards the policy that John has on the screen right now, which is the enforcement mechanism. This has the part that has to be absolutely crystal clear. You know, this is what we're going to have to point to and say, this is what our policy allows us to do. Certainly training, certainly mediation, certainly, you know, working with the staff so that they don't immediately jump from stage 1 to stage 12, you know, is really important. But at the same time, you don't want to discourage staff from having any of those tools available to them. If they see something unsafe, of course we want them to call 911. Of course we want to have a way to intervene, because what we don't want is we don't want additional workers' comp claims. We don't want, you know, additional patrons being injured and suing us or going after our insurance. I mean, those are all the things that I have to think about when looking at these policies. And certainly I hear that the board shares a lot of these same sorts of concerns. So I really do think that the policies here could be tweaked a little bit. You know, they certainly breaking that up so that, you know, the patrons who refuse to comply are asked to display identification so that reports can be generated and filed with their supervisors. And then list out, you know, in addition, at staff's discretion, you know, the patron may be asked to leave the library for the day. Something like that might help break it up a little bit more. But I do think you need to still list out, you know, here are the tools available to you. And then you talk to the staff and say, we want you to understand that you should never feel unsafe in these situations. You know, we want you to try to work with the people. We want you to understand where they're coming from, you know, and try to mediate some of these disputes. Somebody found that objectionable and complained about it. Would you mind ensuring that if you're going to look at that kind of material, you sit over in, you know, a different area where it's, you know, a little bit more protected? I don't know. I'm floating ideas, but
And I think it similarly, when we did discuss this policy a couple of years ago with the leadership team and then relaying the information to the staff, it looked as though we were being soft on crime, right? Because we're allowing people back in because the policy says no more than 1 year. So why do we have, as an organization, a list of people who are forever banned? Because there is no such thing. It may have been, but they should have gotten a letter saying you're welcome to come back. And we just kind of let it sit. But we do need these mechanisms. We do need the tools available to be able to say, this is our policy and it says you can't do that. And, you know, but we are jumping to making judgment calls rather than specifically pointing out that the guidelines state you can't do this. I mean, people didn't really even reference it. When people would go to a patron, our staff would go to a patron and say, what you're doing is wrong. We should hand them this paper saying, here's what we expect you to do. But they weren't doing that. They were just going and saying, don't do that. And so definitely a procedure and the chain of events. But again, just by discussing it, I think people got to feeling unsafe because we were talking about letting people back in who were kicked out. And again, this policy was never intended to be forever or punitive in such a way, but it's turned into that, almost weaponized.
I mean, like, how are you going to enforce, like, neglect of your bodily hygiene gives offense and to a nuisance to other patrons? That's really very subjective.
It certainly is, Miss Martha. It
One,
certainly is.
I mean, there's definitely things on this list that I personally, you know, from the way I personally feel about it, I think they should go and that they're insensitive. But, you know, I'm not a big feelings person. So I'm trying to balance it out. But you know, yes, I think some of this stuff, it does seem like it's a lengthy list of every possible thing. So I think I mean, I'm all for looking over this and discussing what needs to go and what needs to stay. But I don't want to take away too many things, as Douglas said, where now we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Like also leave such items unattended at any time. People do this all the time, and then they go to the library, they go to the employee, say, oh, you know what, they stole this out, whatever my trip. Well, you know what, you left it on the chair and you left it unattended, and then you expect that nothing's gonna happen. Well, you need to wash your things no matter where you're at. So that's another thing too. How do you, there's nothing you can do about that.
Well,
Yeah,
not to mention we have an
respond to
unattended
that one.
minors. We'll go ahead.
You know, one of the things that is important about rules is not always just that they're explicitly something that we can enforce, but it also sets an expectation to people and says, you know, we're not responsible when your laptop walks away. You know, to some extent, putting people on notice about stuff is in fact important for us to do.
I mean, do we have little placards that, you know, I can't even go to Starbucks without a little placard somewhere saying that I can't, please leave, don't leave your items unattended. So, you know, I'm not trying to do your job for you at all, John, but I see a lot of things that maybe we can do to help or brainstorm or collaborate on that end to provide clarity to the staff while also making our policy very clear to patrons.
I also don't think we should. I mean, it's positive that to tell people what the rules are or what could happen at the library, but I also don't want to put it in their face to kind of send the message that this place isn't safe or that people around you are going to steal your stuff.
Do you feel that way when you go to Starbucks? I
I
mean,
don't go to Starbucks first of
well,
all, but
you know, I mean, like, that's somebody's personal opinion, and we can't control how somebody might feel over what signage, you know.
I think there's a difference between like Starbucks versus us, where we're trying to, we want our community to feel safe, especially in this type of community where people don't feel safe. And just putting signs up where it says like, oh, like, you know, someone might steal your stuff, or, you know, you might as well say, what, don't sit by the window because someone's going to throw a table at the window. I just don't want people to feel unsafe or like that the place isn't welcoming. Does that make
But
sense?
also remember that, you know, we've generated reports even from our own staff that have left stuff unattended in places that they probably shouldn't have, and it's, you know, disappeared. You know, we do have to set expectations for people to some extent.
And people might, you know, it's also a good reminder, because maybe I didn't even think about that. Maybe it never even crossed my mind that somebody might take something from my bag. So maybe I appreciate the sign, and it's a good reminder, like, oh yeah, it doesn't have to be worded in a way that is offensive.
Well, and just as a caveat, I can't tell you the number of times I've seen patrons sitting at computers, shaving and or eating and drinking in front of a sign that says no eating and drinking in front of the computer. So it's not uncommon. But it's at the same time, there is an expectation that this is a public building, just like photographs. We can take photographs, expect that if you're going to be in this building, we have to post somewhere that photography is permitted. And so by having it posted in one place versus, you know, in somebody's face the minute they walk in the door, what they can and can't do. We want to be a welcoming place. And, you know, we currently treat children differently. And most libraries I've worked for so far have had unattended minors policy, because we are not in loco parentis. We do not act as the parent in lieu, but we have a hard time because of our policy making the judgment call whether to call Child Protective Services and or the truancy officer. We have an ongoing relationship with truancy because people experiencing homelessness will come in during hours that we're open, and that you should be in school, shouldn't you be? Because they should. Within 24 hours of moving to a new place, you're supposed to enroll your kids in school. But that's all things that we know based on experience, not based on a policy. And you know, the disruption of the library, there is a youth in the library policy, but it does, I mean, if they're being good, we have no recourse to say, shouldn't you be with a parent or shouldn't you be in school? And so we're kind of just, we have no teeth, because currently our policy states that, you know, they can be here because we don't leave children who need assistance or supervision unattended. But if they're a good kid who's going to sit quietly and not bother anybody, they can come in like Matilda every single day and spend the whole day at the library, and we would be none the wiser because our policy leaves us open.
So what is your opinion on that? Would you like to see that go away?
Just like leaving your laptop in a computer. We had someone steal somebody's backpack, and there was a whole incident out in front of the library because somebody left their stuff in a meeting room to run outside and make a phone call, and then somebody else absconded with their things. Just like kids, I wouldn't bring my kids and just drop them or let them go to the library alone. It is a reasonable expectation that we are a safe space. And so as far as leaving kids who need assistance or supervision, who are we to make that judgment call based on this guidelines governing the use of the library? We are not in loco parentis, but that puts us in that gray area that we are judging whether they need assistance or supervision.
Well, but I mean, understand that if you have an unattended kid in the library who gets hurt, the parent's going to be knocking on all of our doors the next morning. I mean, you know, so I think we do need to think about maybe clarifying even our policy with regard to youth. I mean, that is something that I've run into in the past, and those don't always go well.
No.
Especially with libraries, because, you know, you do want to be welcoming, especially to teenagers who are more able to function on their own.
And I can't tell the difference between 18 and 28 anymore. I'm getting old.
Yeah, but you can probably tell the difference between a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old, you know, just.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that needs to be tightened up personally.
I agree.
And so I guess I see two conversations going on here. What policies we need to have and how do we enforce those policies or promote that we have those policies?
So I think we should have the policy discussion, and the procedures discussion is a secondary discussion maybe that we have with John at another date, or if John wants us to be involved in that, or if that's something John wants to spearhead on his own. But I agree that there are two conversations, and one of them I don't feel is pertinent to this meeting.
Agreed.
Correct.
And I'd be happy to write a draft and work
implementing
with
the
Josue.
policy is really something that we probably shouldn't be like too restrictive on in the policies that we write. But how do you plan to move forward with this, John? Are you going to draft something for us to see what, based off this conversation?
So my preference is to draft a document that can be reviewed by the board, and working with you, Josue, in the coming weeks to kind of refine what that looks like, and then presenting a draft to be considered, not necessarily to be acted upon, but, you know, in terms of writing the policy, I'm happy to write a draft and share it with the committee. I'm not sure exactly, again, because the guidelines were approved as per the policy revised 2014. They are on our policies page because they were approved by the Board of Trustees. So I think focusing first on the use of the library policy, per Douglas's suggestion, not gutting it and removing our ability to do anything, but solidifying it, not necessarily mentioning the police 2 times. So I can create a draft and share it with the governance committee in the coming weeks. But also, this is just one of those opportunities to say, as we met the last time or the time before last, where we have a whole long list of things that we can accomplish. Now is our opportunity to say, this is what we want to change as an organization, so we are more welcoming, so that we are more inclusive and equal and fair. And I think this is one low-hanging fruit that I picked out because, again, I think we need to pick one and stick with one, and then move on to the next one. But it's relatively obscure as to which one is the most important one to start with. But I certainly can draft a revision to this. One of the things that we were working on before is getting rid of all of this information from the bottom, except for the policies are required statute or a lot of, that's no problem. But we don't need to sign at the bottom of these things. I think we need to make sure that there's a revised and approved date and list the revisions at the bottom, maybe like revised 2014, 2012, 2016, whatever the case may be.
That sounds great.
Also, John, I'll send you some of the information that I pulled from other libraries. Maybe the wording could be just tweaked a little bit for our policy, Because we don't, if, in looking at it, we don't have anything that says not to leave leave things unattended, do we? I'm trying to read through them. But anyway, I'll go out and I'll just send you some suggestions, okay?
Right. Thank you. I'd appreciate that. Yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't say anything in our, ask the patrons to not leave your stuff unattended. There really isn't.
Yeah. So
It's-
that means we're responsible, right?
I would
I
make
won't-
sure that our policy says we're not responsible, but I don't think we need to tell people not to do it. In a policy, at least.
Yeah, but what if I come back and say my phone got stolen here and you guys didn't warn me at all? I mean, then I can go and call whoever or contact legal and say, they didn't warn me that I shouldn't have my phone here. Now, whether that would stand up in court, I don't know, but
What?
Really,
Yeah, I think I mean, maybe like at the front door, like that little lobby entrance, say the Waukegan Public Library is not responsible for any missing items. I mean that's common throughout,
yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
but not like at tables or areas where people are sitting with their families.
No, you don't need a ton out. I was just saying, a placard somewhere that says it is not uncommon.
So like assume responsibility for locker, so, yeah, that's what they put in the locker room at a lot of places. They put the assumed over, what can't public library responsibility for lost or stolen items while you are in their premises. And then that's it. And they just put it right there. So right there shows that we're not, don't come and tell us that something got stolen, because you know what, it said it right there. That's it. When you came in.
I don't mean to like harp on this, but I do think that it really is one of those things. Like lawyers are constantly rated among like most hated people in America. The reason for that is because people are incredibly litigious. You gotta warn them. The more that we can do to tell people and set their expectations, the more we've got to point at down the road. And I'm not saying that, it would stand up in court if somebody came in and tomorrow and said, my cell phone got stolen, you guys were responsible for it. But I am saying it'll be a little easier to defend if we can say, there was a big sign right in front of them while they were making that complaint that said, we're not responsible for it.
And if I could, it also, this is from my scouting days, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So when we make decisions on things like furniture, if the next time we buy chairs for our computers, we make sure we don't buy the ones with wheels on the bottom, because it's not uncommon for somebody to reach back for their chair and for the thing to slip out from behind them. And we've had several falls because, and we would assume that people know how to sit down, right? We would assume that people know how to do the things that we all do. But we all have accidents, we all have moments, and again, just the advisory statement as people come in is not a bad idea, but I don't want people to be bombarded with don't do this, don't do that, don't do this every turn of every corner. We need to remind people that we are here to help them be successful, not to make sure they fit within our box.
Right. I agree.
I want to, like other places, they make you sign like a little contract, like I will, or we will, whatever, and then we will, behave in a respectful manner while in the library. We will, whatever, and then kind of like something that you do when they get their library card. So in other words, they can't say later on, oh, you know what, I didn't know that that's not allowed or whatever.
This is
Does that not happen currently, John?
No.
No, and I was gonna bring that up. I had to do that at least at 2 libraries. And again, it's a piece of paper that I threw away or lost, but it might be something we want to consider going forward.
And the other one about harassing, we could say it in the positive. We will be respectful to library personnel, not harass, but we will be respectful, in speaking or in our communication with library personnel here in the premises. So that way, like they understand that, we're not going to put up with them being, nasty. And that leaves it open. It's very vague as to what is considered respectful. You know what I mean?
So I have another question, John. Can people go in those study rooms and drink like sodas or water or?
Yes, as long as there's a lid. I think that, and that was part of the bigger picture, is that maybe it's more prudent to just say no food or drink in the library because, one, the smell, two, it makes a huge mess and we have to clean carpets because somebody dropped their cheeseburger. I mean, at this point, it makes more sense to say no food or drink in the library because it's gross and we're in the middle of a pandemic. Who would eat a meal out in, without a mask on in a library building? We just need to start working on making this place, again, putting it out there, because we certainly can, as was recommended, we can add to the application process for library cards that people will adhere to a certain decorum, that they will conduct themselves or ask for help rather than trying to handle it themselves. At the same time, we set ourselves up when we're allowing people to come in and eat and drink in the building anyway. And I get it. And we don't want to be exclusive, but there are certain liabilities to having anybody. What if somebody chokes on library property because they were eating too fast? There's all sorts of nebulous gray area that I want to try and avoid by making the policy a little clearer.
See, I think this is a really good example, John, because I agree with you about, I think, no food. I think there's peanut allergies. Somebody comes in, touches something, my kid touches it, big disaster. So I'm with you with no food. But I think this is the fine line between the need for rules and laying them out. Well, we don't want to be so inclusive that we are hurting other people. You know what I mean? So I think there's a balance in all of this, and some of them is just as simple as no food in the library.
So
Is
those
that
teams
common
that
at
come
your
after,
library, John?
Oh, I'm sorry. I agree wholeheartedly. I think that the idea of a contract for behavior or, fine line, there is certainly a fine line for the rules that are enforceable or not enforceable. And to that end, I think we have an opportunity to bring some justice into this process rather than being punitive. That was my big takeaway, is that our rules and policies are typically kind of punitive in libraries in general. To Douglas's point, you got to tell people what you expect, otherwise it's the Wild West. At the same time, we don't need to pick on specific individuals who don't seem to be getting it. We need to counsel them and help them understand how to be successful rather than, throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
So let's say that you have a student that constantly, comes to the library, is very disruptive, or the librarian student to behave and he, flicks you the finger or talks back to her or, is very nasty to the librarian, then in that case, then could we say, just, not ban, but maybe we can say that this student, based on your behavior, that have almost like a parent contract, you tell the parent, listen, the only way your kid's going to come back in the library because based on his behavior is if you accompany your child.
That's
Because I
basically
know-
what I'm recommending, because at the end of the day, we need to sit down with people who are not following the rules and let them know that why they've not followed what the consequences are, because we shouldn't tolerate bad behavior that impacts our people and hurts us, and or makes people feel less than. But it does tend to, any rules have a tendency to disproportionately affect certain groups of people, and that's what we want to get away from.
Can you give me an example so I have some clarity with that about our current rules, what you think is disproportionately affecting a class of people?
Well, again, getting back to the guidelines, let me share the screen.
Just so I can get an idea where we should go with it.
I can help you, John.
Yes, please.
Look at the one where it says use your cell phone in a manner that is loud or disruptive to others.
Yeah, it's subjective, I think.
It is certainly.
Many of these are very subjective, very. But I mean, I understand what Douglas is saying about keeping them, kind of vague, but they're pretty vague. I mean, what is loud and disruptive? That could be very cultural.
Yeah.
It certainly is cultural, especially if a person is hard of hearing, but also, to take a call at the computers when they don't know that they're not supposed to take calls on the computers because there's no signs. It is typically our safety monitors will have to go around, and it's people of color who are using phones in a way that's too loud. And it's only those people that are getting picked out or singled out in our ELC who are on their phones and not, everybody else. You know,
I
they're-
think
they're
that's a
picking-
policy. Sorry, John, to interrupt. I don't want to lose my thought, but I think that's a policy that you can combine with other things like just don't be loud,
Right.
whether it's on your cell phone or your tablet or with your friends. Just don't be loud.
I mean, is there an area that we can designate that
I
we
was
could
thinking.
say, if you could please, excuse me, if you don't mind taking this over here, I can walk you over here. This is a great place for you to sit down and take that call.
Or similarly, to create a space that is quiet for somebody who wants a quiet space, so that when
Yes.
somebody wants a quiet space, well, we have a place for you, because we can't guarantee that somebody's not going to take a call at their computer or not going to listen to music in the teen area. We can't guarantee that, but we can guarantee that we develop soft spaces or quiet spaces.
Yeah. I think that's a great alternative. Then Douglas, would we be able to completely eliminate anything regarding noise?
About the,
I think it would probably depend. I mean, you certainly may still want to write it in there that, quiet spaces shall, have an expectation of quiet. That,
So you can enforce the quiet in those spaces. Okay.
You still sort of have to designate something in there, but,
Okay.
we can certainly tweak it based on what John comes up with.
And again, if I could point out that one of our parts of the policy, understand that library customers who are children have the same rights and responsibilities as adult library customers. And that's the thing, that when people are upset about the way somebody's behaving, not to pick on you, Tatiana, but what you heard was offensive, but maybe that's part of their culture or their art, is the music that has bad language. Now, should it be listened to out in the middle of the children's section when there's kids playing? Probably not. There might be a better place. So we can say, there's these study rooms. If you want to listen to music without headphones, we can give you a study room to listen to music, but not to do it out in the open, or to look at pictures of girls in bikinis in the children's department as a grown man. That's probably not appropriate. And it's probably something that needs to be it certainly needs to be addressed.
So John, we're an hour into the meeting now, and could you send out this document? Or I think we already got it, right?
We have it.
We already got it. Could we, as trustees, review it, keep it within our committee for now and our recommendations?
Yes,
to John,
please.
so that he can put together a draft that we can discuss a little more in detail next week, and we can approve or not approve, and also send it to the board for full approval.
What is the timeline, Josue, that you want
A month.
with this one?
So
1 month?
we'll discuss it at another governance committee meeting, but at that point, we'll be voting on approval of it to send to the full board, which will then vote on it also in April.
John, are you open to getting feedback on this, or would you prefer to
certainly.
prepare a draft and then let?
I welcome any feedback you have, and
Okay.
I will incorporate it in said draft.
I think we should send our initial thoughts to John before he starts drafting a new draft, and then send that to us, John, so we can get you more feedback before the next meeting.
Do you want to maybe set a deadline for that?
So if everyone can get their feedback to John by the end of this week, and then John, you can get us something by the beginning of next month.
I certainly can. I would give until next Friday, the 12th, if we could, because this week is quickly dwindling down to nothing.
Okay.
But then that way it's a few days in advance of the board meeting, and we can have conversations as necessary.
Perfect.
I would suggest also that the thing, Lynn, you had brought up about other libraries, because I know where I brought up about Barrington, where they allow 2 hours session on the laptop, on the computers, and they put them in a way that anyone walking by can see it. And also they put a volume limit, like as to how loud the computer can go. So I don't know, I think we need to look at other libraries as far as the wording instead of, because I think we still have a lot that really needs to be cleaned up on this if I write clean up after myself, then I'm like, well, what's the custodians for? You know what I mean?
Sylvia, you're muted.
That's good feedback to send to John. I think if you see something that Waukegan should establish.
Well, I certainly will also do research. I will go to other libraries, and I don't just write these from my brain, but I use the framework of other libraries' policies to create our own.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, because I don't think there's anything in there about firearms, and that really should be in the policy,
Mhm.
right, Douglas?
That's probably a good one to put in there.
Okay, okay, I will send my suggestions to you,
Yes, please.
John. Okay.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Douglas, and
we
thank
have-
you, Josue.
No problem. Did we have any public comment?
There was none as of 4:00 p.m.
Okay.
So I'll
Well,
make a motion,
yeah, go ahead.
I'll make a motion then to adjourn.
I'll second.
There's a motion to adjourn by Sylvia and second by Tatiana. Sylvia, voting.
Yes.
Martha,
Yeah.
Tatiana,
Yes.
and Josue, yes. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you,
for
everyone.
the discussion.
Thank you, Josue. That was
Thank you
great.
for a lively conversation.
Thank you
Yes.
very much